Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a special edition of Ask an OpenShift Admin. We are joined today by the one and only Peter Lauterbach, and as always, the great and I can't say illustrious because that's Langdon's name, but the one and only Andrew Sullivan. Andrew,
Man,
what are we talking about today, man?
Peter, you're special. You get a special edition and everything.
Mhm.
Me and Chris, it's just meh. Yeah, so thank you, Chris, and welcome, Peter. So this is the Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hour. Man, that's a mouthful. I'm gonna have to get used to that. So this is one of the Office Hour series shows here on OpenShift TV that we stream out. And the goal here is to give you, our audience, the ability to, well, ask us anything, right? Whatever it is that's top of your mind, whether or not it's related to the topic we'll be discussing today, is welcome at any point in time. And I'll try and remember to remind you all of that periodically throughout the show. So don't hesitate to ask us questions in the chat. We'll keep an eye on those as we go through, and be sure to answer those to the best of our ability, or drag in others, kicking and screaming or not, as needed to get those questions answered. So today, as Chris and I both said, we are joined by Peter Lauterbach, product manager for, among other things, OpenShift Virtualization here in Red Hat. So Peter, if you don't mind giving or introducing yourself, as in the famous words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I know who are you and what do you do?
Peter, you're on mute.
There we go.
There you go.
Technology working today. Like to request a song. I'm one of the product managers in the Cloud Platforms business unit.
You're really quiet, Peter.
You're quiet.
Okay. And I love this technology. Give me 2 seconds here.
It's a good thing everybody's not working from home with video conferencing.
I am super lucky that I actually upgraded my Wi-Fi, and it's way better. All right, here we go. Let's try this. Is that better now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Testing. There we go. Yeah, my microphone has a mind of its own too. Let's start over. Hi, this is Peter Lauterbach. Excuse me. I'm one of the product managers in the Cloud Platforms business unit. I focus on virtualization, similar to Andrew. My original product is Red Hat Virtualization, or REV. And for the past year and change, I've been focused on OpenShift Virtualization, which is KVM and OpenShift.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, as Peter said, one of my responsibilities, official responsibilities, beyond just live streaming once a week, is kind of OpenShift and virtualization, and that includes, among other things, all of the virtualization platforms that OpenShift can run on. Right. Most of you who have interacted with me know that I talk a lot about Vsphere and Rev and all of that other stuff. But also that bleeds into OpenShift virtualization itself, which is the topic of today's show. So in traditional Ask an OpenShift Admin or OpenShift Admin office hours fashion, I do have a couple of things that I want to cover beforehand. So I guess what the press would call a retraction, etc. I don't have any retractions this week. Not to say I wasn't incorrect last week, because that would be surprising if I got everything right. Just nothing that anybody pointed out to me. So I do appreciate it when you all do highlight that, Andrew, you were wrong here, so that way I can correct myself. So keep us honest, by all means. But that being said, there's a couple of things that have come up over the last week or so that I want to bring up, that I want to talk about with you all, or at least make sure that you're aware of. So I have my handy dandy sticky note here that I use to keep track of these things. So let's see, Vsphere datastore configurations. So I helped a customer, helped an account team, because essentially what happened, they deployed their Vsphere cluster using, I think it was UPI, and more or less left the configuration at default. Nothing wrong with that, except that they were using the default thin storage class, which is pointed at the same data store that the virtual machines are deployed to, and happily consuming storage, right? Provisioning all of those VMDKs to act as PVC backing, so on and so forth. And the data store filled up. So yeah, this of course being bad, They are thin provisioned disks, which means that when that data store runs out of capacity, basically everybody stops functioning at the same time, which is really bad.
Do you know who actually hates? Do you know who hates database or storage filling up worse than virtual infrastructure admins?
Databases. Ones? Yeah.
Oh, databases. DBAs just don't like that.
Not good for your database. No, not at all.
JP Date, I see your question. I'll hit that in just a second. Filling up the data store is bad. My first reaction was to chastise them for not having appropriate monitoring in place to catch and prevent such a scenario from happening. Ultimately, the mitigation is to configure, add additional data stores to your Vsphere configuration. And somewhere in my links here, I thought I had the link that I'm looking for. So I will post this guy into the chat here. So it is supported to go in. You can modify the configuration. You can add additional data store definitions inside of there, and then just create additional storage classes to point at those. It does become a bit of a management task, right, for the application teams, for the administrator to kind of keep up with what's going on there. But this is the perils of not having data store, or what are they? Storage clusters, right? The equivalent of a DRS cluster, but for storage or for data stores available through either the CSI paradigm, as far as I know, or the entry storage provisioner for Vsphere. So if anybody has any questions about that, just let me know. I sympathize. I understand that sometimes that can be difficult. VMware, of course, recommends using the CSI provisioner. That gives you a lot of visibility on the vSphere, or excuse me, the vCenter side as well. So that way you at least have two potential layers of ability to see and get those alerts. The other thing, which has been a hot debate this morning, Chris, I don't know if you've seen in any of those chats.
Feed on the streaming rig. That's very weird. Yeah, it's back now, but continue. Sorry, folks.
All right. Thank you. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up, just a quick recap there, was resizing control plane nodes. So the docs, and I'll paste the link here into chat. So the docs kind of very plainly state that you can't resize control plane nodes. Essentially choose how big your cluster is going to be before you deploy it, and then deploy it with control plane nodes of that size. So can you resize them? And the officially documented / supported way of doing this, if you will, as soon as I can find the right window that I was looking for here to get my link, is to effectively remove the control plane nodes one at a time, and then re-provision them and re-add them to the cluster. Now you may be thinking, well, that's silly. Why can't I just turn it off? Why can't, and adjust the CPU and memory and then turn it back on? And the reason for that is it's not tested. So therefore, we don't know if there's any edge cases. We don't know if there's something that could potentially break inside of there. Whereas the whole remove and replace process is tested, right? That's kind of the core disaster recovery piece. Okay, JP Dade. Saw the video on bare metal installation, creating an ISO to install the cluster. Could you use the bare metal image creation to install 4.7 on Vsphere? That creates static DHCP leases. So you can use the bare metal ISO image, and it's as far as I know you can. Because it used to be, there's only one ISO.
Yeah.
So you can use the ISO to deploy onto Vsphere, and that includes UPI, right? When you put the infrastructure or the platform type as Vsphere, it'll automatically configure all of the appropriate things. So you don't have to use the OVA, though we do recommend it. And then creating static DHCP leases. I believe that would work. if you can clarify what you mean by creating the static DHCP leases, that would be helpful. One thing to note, I think you might be referring to what we talked about last week, where if you set the DHCP lease to infinite, will it automatically reserve that? So I believe that only officially works with bare metal IPI. I haven't tested it with a bare metal UPI installation or non-integrated installation. So yes, you could use the ISO. You could do a platform equals none installation on top of Vsphere, but I don't know if it would work in that instance. So it might be worth trying. The worst that happens is it's just a bare metal install that you can control that way. So I would check on that. But I'll also say that doing it that way, which is effectively a bare metal UPI, you're pre-creating the VMs already. You already know the IPI addresses. So kind of a trade-off there. It may not be necessary. Okay, enough about the past and
the future.
Yeah, it's the future. Right? The future is here. What's that thing? The future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. So Peter, what? I know we had a pre-meeting on this. I know there's a lot of stuff that we want to talk about. I want to make sure that we have time to cover that. So please tell us about OpenShift virtualization. What is OpenShift virtualization, and why are we interested in? Why do we care?
Why would you care? Why would somebody say, hey, I think VMs in my Kubernetes cluster would be an awesome thing? That kind of question?
Yeah.
Okay. So interestingly enough, this actually is, the main issue is, hey, I've got a traditional setup, virtualization setup. I've got lots of guys that are trained up on, say, Vsphere or Rev or even OpenStack. And we've got an infrastructure that we're doing. We've gone and deployed a cloud native infrastructure. Maybe it's in a public cloud. Maybe we've got some stuff on-prem. We're either doing our own thing, or we're doing OpenShift. And right now, those two worlds don't really talk to each other, right? And in fact, the virtual infrastructure admins are like, yep, we provide VMs and don't care what our customers put into it. And the developers are, hey, we got OpenShift, and I think they're in VMs, but I don't really know. This kind of breaks the sort of that SRE process, right? Which is the guy that actually do the infrastructure and dev all work together, right? And that's a future for a lot of people, right? There are some customers that we talk about, like Lockheed, that are sort of in that future today. But for a lot of people, it's how do I get there, right? So now I've got these. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I've seen you do these overview presentations for OpenShift virtualization, and you've got a great set of charts and quotes that come from various analyst firms, et cetera, about how containers are what's in vogue now, and we're seeing a lot of new applications being containerized, but the vast majority of application logic and application data is still in virtual machines.
Right, that gravitational mass, and by the way, it's not going away anytime soon, right? So virtual machines, very mature technology. There's lots of reference architectures. There's lots of automation around that help you create those things and keep it up and running and operational, which is fine, right? And like you said, most people are running the business on it, whether it's a Oracle, SQL Server, something like that. But the reality is that that rate is flat. There's not a lot of changes there. In fact, a lot of people actually work in, we sort of get, bonused on our uptime, right? And we literally don't want anything to change here. So this idea of rapid deployment and rapid application development and sort of an agile methodology is kind of opposite of what these guys are focused on, right? But like you said, there's lots of valuable data bound up in enterprise databases and business logic that's in middleware, right? And some of it's even on old, tell me what kind of language I can get away with on the call here, on the stream here, right? But a crusty Windows .NET application that was written maybe a decade ago.
Been in that situation.
Maybe the guy that actually wrote it is not only not working at this company, but he's actually retired because that's how old this thing is.
Right.
And and like nobody wants to touch. They go, oh, we need to go update this to to handle this functionality because we got some sort of regulatory requirement. Everybody goes, yeah, not it. Don't.
So, and it's funny you mentioned, Windows applications, and especially old Windows applications, because 2 weeks ago, Christian Hernandez was on to talk about Windows containers, which really means adding Windows nodes to your OpenShift cluster and Server 2019 and all that other stuff. And
Right.
Essentially, if I remember correctly, OpenShift Virtualization is like Server 2012 R2 and newer virtual machines can be supported. So it's one of those, bring them as they are. Again, man, I'm on a quotes run today. Where you bring you're sick, you're tired,
you're hungry, you're poor, yeah, something like that. Yeah. So basically, and let me just touch on this detail here, right? So the hypervisor technology that we're basing this on is KVM, right, which runs across all the platforms, right? So RHEL, Rev, OpenStack, and now OpenShift. Right, and when we do, there's actually a certification program that Microsoft has that says, hey, if you run this, it's very similar to our RHEL certification, right? So the hardware certification actually includes the virtualization test, right? So literally any platform that can run RHEL can run Rev, right? So that's how we get away with that, right? And that certification for Microsoft applies not only to the current operating system that you're testing, like Windows Server 2019, but it applies to all valid supporting operating systems that Microsoft supports, which takes you back to 2012 R2. There have been calls I've been on with customers who shall remain nameless, probably for their own protection. They say, hey, we got like Windows Server 2008, and you're kind of like, okay. And then Windows Server 2003, and it's like, yeah, no, you got to do the old Yeller and take that thing out to the back and get it on something slightly more modern that's not such a security vulnerability.
I'm not going to comment on that. So just to recap, right, from a developer, from an application perspective, right, it's bringing existing applications within a reasonable lifespan forward into the Kubernetes paradigm. So I'm going to put on my administrator cap for a moment. We're changing or we're moving from an old, or traditional data center virtualization platform onto effectively Kubernetes, right? So what does that mean for me, right? Should I be scared? Should I be alarmed?
Should I freak out, right? What do I, right? I got a whole bunch of stuff today in terms of security, monitoring, day two stuff, operational things that keep us in the green. What is on the other side, right? Like I hear Kubernetes is cool, but sort of what are the facilities over there that are in the platform? And let me back up a little bit, right? Which is, and I sort of skipped over this part, right? Which is, this is part of a larger modernization effort at a company, right? No cloud native developer goes, oh man, you know what this 12-factor application needs is some virtual machines, and that'll make it really cool, right? It's more that, hey, we got some valuable logic bound up in these databases in this middleware, and we need to bring it along. And then back to your question of security and operational stuff, right? There's already things in the Kubernetes and particularly our distribution of it, right? OpenShift, in terms of security, right? I've got Arcos, which is an immutable OS, right? So even if somebody actually gets on your node, well, they can't do anything, right? There's SE Linux, which is baked in, right? RHEL is Arcos. You get all that protection along with that as well, right? And the other thing is that it now becomes a single platform, right? So my virtual machines are first-class citizens in this new cloud-native paradigm, right? So all the things that you can do with a pod and a container, you essentially can do with a virtual machine, right? So it can connect to SDNs, it can participate in service meshes, it can be part of developer pipelines. It respects all of the resourcing, and balancing that happens in Kubernetes, which is fairly robust and getting more robuster as we do things like the descheduler. So the nice thing is, and that's the way we did it, right? It's Kubernetes first. This isn't like, hey, let's replicate everything about what we have in the virtual environment, not only the good stuff, but also kind of the crufty, weird stuff that we got, and do that in Kubernetes, right? So if you think of a product like Rev, the Vert platform, right, knows a lot about the storage and does a lot of the storage management and the network management, right? It's all kind of sort of that big ball of mud, as they say, right? Yeah. And when we did KubeVirt, and when we came up with KubeVirt and OpenShift Virtualization, we said, look, we're going to respect the Kubernetes architecture, right? So everything's got to be an API, and more importantly, there's a very clear separation, right? So the virtualization piece is KVM, right? And it has a lot of the capabilities that it has on the other platforms, but the storage interface and the network interface, there's a beautiful bright line of API that any pod can talk to, and our VMs use as well, right? So things like cloning and replication and network management, that's literally not the VM's problem, but all of the features and functionality that you have of those capabilities can be, for the most part, can be used by a virtual machine.
So I've got 3 questions for you. So one is my question, one comes from Twitter, and one comes from chat. So I'm going to ask my question first.
Okay.
Or let me rephrase that. I'm going to ask all 3 questions, but I think the natural order is to answer mine first, and then probably the one from Twitch, which is Rapscallion Reeves, which, what a great word, Rapscallion. And then the other one from Twitter is from Sachin. So
the second I disconnect. So now we're back.
Are you running that on Kubernetes? You might need some OpenShift virtualization there to help you out.
Maybe.
Right.
Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, I see we're back. All right. So my question first. Do we see any, or do you expect there to be any contention between a traditional virtualization admin and the OpenShift admin who now has VMs running in their platform? So that's question number 1. So question number 2, so Rapscallion Reeves, so if OpenShift is running on VMs, so in other words, it's an OpenShift in Vert or Rev deployment, is there any visibility to the undercloud of the KubeVirt VMs? In other words, if you create a VM in OpenShift, will it see it in Vert/Rev? So, and then the third one from Twitter, get out of here, calendar notifications. Are there plans to have S2I support with virtual machines as well? S2I being source to image. Okay.
All right, so let's.
I'll try and keep you reminded of those questions as we go through.
Yeah, I know. I wrote them down here too, right? So the
you're smarter than me.
Yeah.
Oh, hell no, that's not true at all. In fact, I usually find myself on a call with a customer. If you're not there, I'll go, "Oh, I'm a smart guy. Let me try to answer it." And I'll get halfway through my sentence, and I go, "Man, I wish Andrew was here because now I'm getting in deep water."
Well, thank you.
So the contention part is, and I'm going to divert off technology for a minute, right? Which is a lot of it has to do with how the organization is set up, right? So if you go read the Google book, right, which I think I've got a copy of it here, right? We just said, hey, we want to do SRE, right?
We just have that handy, awesome. Right? Like,
I keep starting it, make it through it, and I'm about a third of the way through, but
it's great sleeping material. But like once you get all the equations out of it, you're good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but there's a lot of concepts, but yeah, you gotta wade through a lot of stuff to get the nuggets. But my point is, even in the conversations we have with customers and prospects today, the organization is very disparate, right, or siloed, right? Which is, hey, we're the VM team, and and they're good at it, right? We're very good at VMs, and yeah, this cloud stuff is, not really known to us, and the dev guys are actually off subscribing to the cloud without even the IT guys knowing about it, right? Sort of that shadow IT or whatever shadow development. But in reality, Kubernetes and cloud native is the future, right? So some of these guys said, look, there's something cool happening over there. Let's go pay attention to it, right? So I think this is an opportunity for a VI admin to take a lot of the principles that they know today about, just good networking, good practices in terms of networking and storage and, data protection, and apply those. The words are different when you get over to Kubernetes, and some of the concepts are different, but they're still valid and valuable, right? So you can take it as an opportunity to go, look, and I got to tell you, actually, again, a slight diversion, when I actually interviewed at Red Hat, I didn't actually have a whole lot of cloud knowledge myself. And they said, oh, it's this product, and I didn't know anything. And I went and Googled it, and I found Minishift, right? And I downloaded Minishift, put it on my Linux workstation, and I was super surprised like how easy it was to get started, right? Which is kind of like, as they say, the first hit is free. So I was hooked at that point. And so if you want to get into it and play with it, it's a good way to do it. And then the comfort of having a virtual machine of, I know how to create a virtual machine, I know how to start it up. And then the other thing is the web console, right? So most of the scary stuff you see around Kubernetes is there's this YAML, there's this long text file that it needs to have the right stuff in it. Well, we actually have a GUI that mirrors all the functions that you essentially can do in the command line and on YAML, right? So you can actually get started with the web console, and this is the thing I find very useful, right? Is I go do things in the web console, and then there's a little tab that says click YAML, and you go, I now, based on what I clicked on and what I set in the UI, I actually see how the YAML's changed, and now I'm actually more comfortable with it. And now I've actually got a little GitHub repo that has YAML in it, and sometimes I go in and edit that stuff directly. So it's actually it makes me look smarter, but it also makes it easier to digest.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I literally just had a conversation with somebody who was asking, is there an API for the things the GUI is doing? I think it's the other way around. The GUI is consuming all of those APIs. So yes,
exactly.
Yes, there definitely is. Okay, so thank you. So I think
now question
probably
two.
Yeah, question 2. So can OpenShift virtualization see, right? Is there visibility to the undercloud for KubeVirt VMs? And I think that this will tie in with, we should probably talk a little bit about the technology, like how it looks, how it works type of thing. And I think that might help answer this question. And I know Chris just pointed out to me privately that Restream isn't moving comments from YouTube to Twitch. So Chris and I both have YouTube up as well. So for anybody on YouTube, we are keeping up with what you're talking about over there.
Trying to, at least.
Yeah, trying to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's see. Let's click this
screen
button.
Sharing music with. Okay, it worked just the first time. Look at that.
I know. Hey.
Yeah, and
I've done this once or twice.
Yeah, and just to set this up, right? The OpenShift virtualization is a feature of OpenShift, right? So this isn't about, hey, can I use VMs without caring about cloud native and OpenShift, right? So you got to be in the OpenShift, ballpark to be caring about OpenShift virtualization, right? And running virtual machines in there. And we're currently targeting on-premise bare metal deployments, right? So that'll kind of, I'll turn it over to you to kind of then talk about sort of what the nuts and bolts look like.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick kind of overview, because I think it'll help answer some of these technical questions that I see coming up. To just do this like scratching, just scratch deep of OpenShift virtualization.
Can you increase that size a little bit?
Yeah,
font size wise. Yeah,
I sure can. So this is my lab cluster. You can see I'm running 4.7. I actually, so OpenShift virtualization 2.6 got pushed by 2 weeks. So I'm running a nightly build in this instance, but 2.6 will be out shortly. So effectively, like everything else, it's deployed as an operator. Let me make sure we can see all of them, right? OpenShift virtualization gets deployed. When you do that, it has, as Peter mentioned, right, there's a bunch of GUI tie-ins, so on and so forth. Like you see this virtualization thing here, there's VMs down here, etc. And then both as an administrator, where I can go to workloads and virtualization, I can see all of my virtual machines that are running inside of here, as well as a developer. I can flip over to here and I can do things like, well, I want to add, let's go to the right default, right project. I want to add a virtual machine, right? And I can choose from, I can see and select from virtual machines that I want to publish. So here's a Fedora 33 template. I want to create a virtual machine. Sure, Amused Herring seems like a good name for this one. Right, we'll click our button here, and just like that, we've got a virtual machine that is in the process of being provisioned.
Right, and by the way, the team that works on the UI here actually has a lot of background in products like Red Hat Virtualization or Rev. So we understand sort of what are the affordances and kind of what are the workflows people want to use, and applying those same concepts to Kubernetes.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because it's a team that's not new to virtualization, so they understand how virtualization admins think. So if I click on my VM here, right, kind of all the expected things, right, here's my console, so on and so forth. But Peter said, remember, it's Kubernetes native. So if I click up here in pods, you can see I've got, like, here's Vert launcher for Amused Herring. So it's literally a pod that's running inside of my environment. Now, to answer your question, Rapscallion Reeves, all of this is running on physical servers. Right? It becomes a hypervisor. So you're deploying a virtual machine. And if I were to go to the terminal over here real quick and do like a ps-a, PS, one of these, you can see here we've got a QEMU KVM process running inside of there. So I mean, technically you can do nested virtualization, but we don't support it. So really, it's not in the concept of I'm deploying a cluster, an OpenShift cluster to, in your example, say Rev, and then I'm using OpenShift virtualization to then talk to Rev to deploy virtual machines, which is what Machine API does. Rather, it's creating virtual machines and deploying them in pods inside of OpenShift. So OpenShift effectively replaces the functionality of Rev at that point. Am I saying that right, Peter?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So I don't know, and let me jump back and forth between things here. I lost my chat window, so I can't see the other question that we got asked.
It was S2I, I think.
Yeah, so I don't know about S2I. I'll have to default to you on that one.
That would be a question that if a customer asked me, I'd say, I don't know, but Andrew knows. And since you've kind of knacked it as well, I'm not sure. Chris, help us out here.
S2I for Vert? I'm not sure. I think Christian was working on that. Was he not? Or was it Jafar? I forget.
So, pipelines, Tecton, as far as I know, would work as expected. S2I, I don't know, because S2I is pretty heavily dependent on basically a Podman build or Docker build type of mechanism, and that wouldn't really work with a VM. So the answer, I think, is no, but I'm not. I'm not like 70% sure of that.
Yeah, like I would say I'm 50% sure, because I would imagine there's a way to make that work, but it would involve like deep knowledge of all the parts and pieces involved, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Ooh. Can I ask a PM stupid question? Like and I get asked a lot of these regularly, like, hey, what about this? Can I do this whiz bang technology thing? Let's back up a step. What's the actual goal? That I don't remember. Was that Rapscallion that asked that?
That was Sachin.
Okay, yeah. So Sachin, maybe if you could say a little bit more about, hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and is this the right technology, or there might actually be a different workflow to actually do what you want that's a little more not only Kubernetes native, but works well with virtual machines.
All right, so we've got a bunch of questions here to
just flew in.
So first,
okay.
JP Dade, does physical to virtual conversion work with OpenShift virtualization?
Yes. So the the thing we've kind of skipped over here, right? We've been focused on, hey, I can go create VMs natively, but like I said, there's actually a whole set of legacy VMs, what is it? The 99% of the gravitational mass of IT stuff is in a virtual machine still, right? And how do I get there, right? So in our traditional world, we actually have products like what's called infrastructure migration services, which would take virtual machines from, say, like a Vsphere environment into a Rev or OpenStack, right? So turn them into KVM VMs. That same technology is now being recrafted in a cloud native way, right? And done by the same team, right? So under the hood, they're using, I believe they use V2V, and I think there is a let me double check, but I believe there is a P2V option there as well, where you can point it at a physical box and say, go figure out what that thing's doing and pull it in. And like I said, this does two things. It does analytics, where it actually can survey your entire inventory and say, I understand the different features that you have, like maybe you're not doing anything special or weird, or it's not a snowflake VM, and that's green, right? So you could literally just bring that in. And the nice thing is we have a warm migration from Vsphere, right? Which is the VM can actually continue to run over here. We connect to the Vsphere APIs, pull the data over, and create the reflection in OpenShift. And as the VM continues to run, we continue to converge and pull data until it matches. And then at a point of your timing and mutual timing and convenience, you can then power down this virtual machine and power it up inside of OpenShift.
I saw literally this morning that the migration toolkit went into beta.
Those guys are awesome. Yeah, it's actually based on the upstream conveyor, but there's other not complications, but there's other factors to take into account, like what does my networking look like? Is that transparent? Will it automatically fail over when I move this service from one platform to another? Which is fine. The other thing so when you say P2V though, the other thing that's super important to remember is, two things, right? One is it a physical because I need raw horsepower, like maybe it's an Oracle database or it's an SAP thing? And the real question is should you be taking that into Kubernetes and putting it into a VM, right? Because if if you think about your resourcing, if you've got a lot of little 1U pizza boxes that are doing your cloud on-prem, and you drop a whopping, SAP VM into that, just because you can, that may not make the most sense, right? If it's doing something valuable for your business, like you need to do that and connect into that thing, maybe that makes sense. But again, you gotta, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
All right.
The other thing that's important. Well, let me just one.
I don't want to cut you off. Yep.
The other thing is that things that are bare metal tend to be actually really old too, right? So like when I said those Windows Server 2000, Windows Server 2003, those are, I think they're process, control type of things, or they're lab machines on a manufacturing floor somewhere that haven't been updated. Let's see, 2003. Who was president back then? Right, that was several administrations ago, right? So, and a lot's happened since then. And would it make sense to would you P2V a Windows Server 2003 R2, outside of Kubernetes and put it somewhere? You really got to think about what your rationale and what your goals are when you do these things.
So the 5-cent version is, yes, it's there, but you might want to consider why it's still physical in 2021.
Right.
And it's going to be the same tools that exist for other KVM. So Vert, V2V, all that stuff. So next question.
I would imagine, and I'm sorry, just to beat on this a little bit, right? Remember, when you get over to your OpenShift world, right, you still have a whole security and compliance team, right? If you look at the, what did we just did the StackRox acquisition and announcement, right? And ACM has a whole bunch of compliance stuff. If anybody regardless of whether that technology works, if anybody has a dream that a Windows Server 2003 VM inside of a Kubernetes cluster is going to pass any sort of security audit, you're kidding yourself. All right, I'm sorry. I'll stop ranting now.
All right.
Okay.
So
Yes.
next question, also from Sachin. Is there a reference architecture for running NFV on OpenShift virtualization, like is available for OpenStack today? As far as I know, no. I from my understanding, so it's KVM underneath the covers, which means that from a
Right.
workload capability standpoint, and I know having talked with engineers and Peter, et cetera, right, they really strive for performance equivalence, right? They don't want there to be any degradation of performance because it's a VM running in OpenShift. So technically possible to run those virtualized, network functions, but we don't have a reference architecture or anything like that at this point. Let me see. Let's
Yeah,
scroll
let
up
me
here.
go find. In one of the blogs I had, it was actually in the OpenShift 4.6 OpenShift virtualization blog that I did in 4.6. So it was what, 3 months ago, probably. Let me see if I can dig it up. We
While
did actually
you're
we did that comparison of, hey, let's run these virtual workloads of Postgres, SQL Server, and we actually had a couple of compute ones like Black-Scholes, financial calculation type stuff. Run them on your traditional virtualization platform, and then create that same workload on OpenShift and OpenShift virtualization, and we essentially got performance parity, right? Because KVM is KVM, right? We've been doing this for, I think it's been in the kernel, a decade now, right? So we know how to do virtualization, right?
yeah.
And the thing about OpenShift virtualization, we're sort of changing the management control plane, right, of how you actually do these things, but the actual core piece of it is very mature and stable technology. So yeah, we had this comparison that showed essentially it was in a couple of percentage points of each other.
So I'm
But
gonna rapid fire
to
answer
this,
some questions since we've got like 10 of them. But
Right.
go ahead
okay.
and finish your thought.
Well, on the NPV, the telco thing, right? So we are focused currently on sort of things like enterprise databases, sort of your traditional IT workloads. We know telcos, especially for things on the edge, want to get there. We're not quite there yet, so we're working. We get this question pretty regularly. We'd be interested in hearing about the use cases, but right now, that kind of things that demand, say, a low latency or some sort of high performance out of the VM, that's kind of we're probably not there yet.
So Chaitanya, I apologize. I am terrible at names, including and especially my children's names. So apologies if I butcher anybody's name. I want to do a job in Kubernetes, practicing basic concepts. So
And I
get
answered
the
that
thoughts
one in
connected.
chat. If you didn't
Yeah, I
see.
saw that there was some other chat about that. Off the top of my head, I would definitely recommend looking at many of the learning resources, which Red Hat has a whole bunch of them that are free, right? You don't have to pay for anything. My default answer is always learn.openshift.com.
Yeah, I just dropped the link in chat.
Yeah, great resource to go and get started and get hands-on, and with some guided scenarios and stuff like that. Conan, can OpenShift virtualization orchestrate virtual machines for an OpenStack when OpenShift is hosted on OpenStack?
Oof.
So no.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to go watch Inception again.
Yeah. So yes, but no. So this is another one of those where it gets confusing. So OpenShift deployed using the IPI method to OpenStack is technically creating and destroying, right, managing virtual machines for itself, right, its own worker nodes using the OpenStack APIs, et cetera, machine API. If we're talking about OpenShift virtualization, then no. However, there are some weird edge cases that may or may not be supported here. So for example, it is technically possible and fully supported to deploy OpenShift to OpenStack that has a virtual control plane and physical worker nodes using Ironic. Now remember, physical servers is required for OpenShift virtualization. So in that case, you could technically deploy OpenShift virtualization inside of there, and it would function exactly as you would expect. I don't know whether or not that's supported. I would be very surprised if that's a tested scenario, but it should work.
In theory, yeah.
I'm going to assume Peter's typing so that he can look that up later. But yeah, so remember, OpenShift virtualization is hosting VMs inside of OpenShift, not OpenShift managing virtual machines and external hypervisors, which is a question that we get pretty frequently.
So, like,
Right.
do we want to talk about nested Vert and where we are along that journey?
Yeah, so, and I see that there's a couple of questions around that. So OpenShift virtualization today requires physical servers, on-premises physical servers. I'll go even further. So nested virtualization technically works. Y'all who are seeing my screen here, this is a nested lab. Technically works, not supported. Great for demos, stuff like that.
Yeah, great for demos. Maybe not great for production.
Yeah, it technically works to deploy and use the hyperscaler bare metal instances. So like you can deploy to AWS i3. Technically works, not supported.
Right.
But that's actually a roadmap item for us, right? And we're being driven by demand, right? So the bulk of the stuff in public cloud is probably either AWS or Azure, and we're having conversations with those teams. But the thing that will actually move that along is customer demand, right? Because that's sure you could do it, but is it actually an economic solution that'll work? That's one of the things that PMs care about. Like, can customers afford it?
So Dan asks, is nested virtualization support on the roadmap? But pause before you answer that. Not looking for nested VMs like what we were just talking about, but rather interested in use cases where virtual machines are able to launch other virtual machines.
Oh, fancy.
So I would judging by your confused face, I would say no.
But wait a minute.
What's the actual use case, right?
Yeah, run that back again, right? Like, say that question again. So they're using virtualization to deploy other virtualization, or using Tecton?
I think this would be
something like
having
that. Yeah.
effectively a virtual control plane with physical workers. And doing it that way. Dan, please speak up in chat if we can clarify. And you're also anybody and everybody's welcome to reach out to me, Andrew.Sullivan at Red Hat, if you want to ask other questions or clarify after the show ends in 11 minutes. Because I know we have a hard stop today.
Yes,
I'm not even actually seeing all of the chat here. I'm on the Twitch channel, but
it's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, and the restream aggregation is being poor today.
Okay, let's move on. I'll figure something out.
Conan, nested virtualization would be interesting. Doing ephemeral things that require virtualization for cloud native CI powered by OpenShift pipelines. Again, nested virtualization in the sense of deploying an OpenShift cluster that's virtual and then hosting VMs inside of there, technically possible. It doesn't invalidate the support of your cluster. It just means that doing nested virtualization isn't supported. Sorry for stepping over you, Peter.
No, that's fine. Well, the interesting part is once you come up with a technology, OpenShift itself has a lot of future stuff that's going on. And, since virtual machines are first-class citizens, the very first question I get after the OpenShift guys announce something is, hey, does it work with OpenShift virtualization, right? So 2 examples are compact clusters, right? Which is, it's not hyperconverged, but it's the idea that I've got 3 nodes, the control plane nodes and customer workloads are kind of rotating all those schedulable masters, or schedulable control plane nodes, or what we call it, something like that. Can you use VMs there? Absolutely, right? You install the operator, you create your VMs just like you would on any OpenShift cluster. The trick there is VMs tend to be more heavyweight in terms of resources of CPU and memory, and you just have to make sure that your 3 nodes are big enough to handle the control plane workload. etcd can be a little cranky sometimes. Your actual cloud native workload, your container workloads, and your virtual machines. The other use case is even farther future, right? And that's a shipping product today, right? The other far future is edge, right? And sort of the single node OpenShift. Could you use VMs there? Yeah, probably. But again, it's not going to run on a 16 megabyte, ARM chip somewhere, you're probably going to need something beefy that can run VMs in it.
I do see Mark Schmidt is here. Hi, Mark.
Yeah,
it's saying that Jeff Bezos, although Jeff Bezos is now in the process of stepping down, would love for there to be nested VMs and VMs in AWS, because that sounds very expensive and something that he would appreciate.
So there's one other. Do we want to talk about futures a little bit too?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the other things people are asking about is sort of the idea of, hey, can I do OpenShift clusters inside of OpenShift, right? And the idea of multi-tenant, right? So if I've got a large bare metal cluster that, some of the server vendors are pushing the 4U box that's maxed out with memory and CPU and possibly storage. But then I actually, everybody gets a cluster, kind of that Oprah thing, like, hey, Chris gets a cluster, Andrew gets a cluster, and you are actually the admin of that. So you can sort of do that today with a UPI and create VMs in the main OpenShift cluster and deploy virtual clusters inside of it. But it's not easy, right? So we're looking at technologies like HyperShift, right, which is that's the act of taking a control plane node and running it actually in a container instead of needing a full node for it. And once we have that kind of technology is more mature, then it becomes much, much easier to deploy what's essentially multi-tenant. Essentially what you've got over here in your traditional IT, where I can do deployments and do tenancy and separate my end users and customers, you'll then be able to do that inside of Kubernetes and OpenShift.
I did get sorry, completely off subject. Somebody asked why I use macOS instead of Linux.
It's a really simple answer for me. Look at all this crap I have to attach to my machine.
Honestly, it's a silly, stupid first world problem, right? I have dual 4K monitors, and the screen scaling in Fedora is all or nothing. So either it's at 100%, so the 4K is super tiny and I'm getting old, so my eyes aren't what they used to be, or at 200%, it's the equivalent of 1080p, which looks nice and sharp on 4K, but is not this type of real estate that I want.
Right.
So macOS gives me the ability to do an equivalent of 1080p. So if I do here, I can bring up this thing and show you that I have, see, it's on this one, which looks like 2560 by 1440.
Right. Yeah.
So that really, that's the reason why. And if you notice here, I'll switch over here. Most of the things that I do are from this Bastion host, which is actually it's a Linux host. Actually, I think I said rel in the chat, but it might be CentOS Stream.
Oh, did you upgrade it?
It is. Yeah.
Change over. Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, I basically do all of my real work, anything Linux or anything anything OpenShift related from a Linux host anyways. I basically use this as a browser.
Yeah. I have two Linux boxes that I use for things. One is actually a very robust server, and the other is just, like set up to be a desktop. And it used to run OBS for this channel, but we've found better ways to do that in theory.
So before we run out of time here, and I think you said we have a hard stop in about 4 minutes, 20 seconds. So say the folks on the stream here, and thank you for your questions, by the way, that actually helped shape the conversation. Hey, I'm interested, virtual machines in Kubernetes sounds interesting. How do I try it, right? So if you already have an OpenShift subscription, or you've got access to an OpenShift cluster, you can actually just install the OpenShift Virtualization operator. You just click on the little marketplace over there, the operator hub. Download it. It's already included. The entitlements are already included. You can download it, install it, and start creating VMs in your namespace in as little as 10 minutes.
Yeah, it really is easy to get deployed and up and running.
Yeah, and the operator actually handles the upgrades as well. So when you go ahead and upgrade your OpenShift cluster, it will say, oh, there's it actually doesn't automatically upgrade the CNV operator, but we say, hey, there's an upgrade available. Do you want to upgrade it? And click here, and that'll happen.
Yeah, I really like the behavior of operators. Like, so for example, you see that this is 2.6.0-637. This is the 4th or 5th nightly release it's updated to. I think I started at like 2 or 6:30, something like that. And it just quietly in the background updates itself according to the nightlies, without any issue. I haven't had to think about it. So it's really nice.
Yeah. And the very last thought, I think, well, it won't be the last one, but there'll be other ones. The last one for this particular stream is Red Hat is very strong in the Vert space, right? So Vert is our upstream. There was actually a summit about a month ago that talked about some very cool things in terms of handling resources. The other big one that we get asked about a lot is GPU enablement, right? So I want to do either compute intensive stuff with AI ML with virtual machines, and then remote visualization. Right. So those two things are actually actively being developed in Vert right now. They are not quite downstream in OpenShift virtualization, but we'll be doing some PCI pass-through coming up very shortly.
Cool.
All right. So I know we've got a little over 2 minutes left. So want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask any last questions that they've got. You are also welcome to reach out to me at any time during the stream or not. To ask questions on any topic, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com or on Twitter @practicalandrew. Peter, I will leave it to you to how much of your contact information to disclose and whether or not you want to subject yourself to that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm actually on Twitter. I think it's PC Lauterbach is my handle. My Red Hat email is not as fancy as yours. It's just PELAUTER at redhat.com.
Didn't get the
I never got an alias. Don't ask me why.
You got to put in a help ticket.
Got a ticket, man.
They'll add I think 2 or 3 aliases. So
okay.
Yeah, and I am at Chris Short on Twitter and cshort@redhat.com. If you have any questions, just like Andrew, I can get them routed in the right direction if I can't answer them at all.
Yep. And so Shyam, can you list the applications that we can do with Kubernetes? So no, but we can describe kind of a general category of applications. So what do I mean by that? So Kubernetes is designed to schedule and control containers. And it doesn't really matter what's in those containers. It could be a simple bash script that reaches out and pings your gateway to make sure that you still have connectivity or something like that. Or it could be anything up to and including like Microsoft SQL Server. So there's a huge broad range of applications out there that can all be hosted in Kubernetes. Really, the only prerequisite is it has to be in a container. And no longer even a Linux container, right? With 4.7, we can now do Windows containers as well.
So yeah, we got to jump. Thanks everybody for joining today. Thank you, Peter, for coming on and talking with us about all things virtualization. And Andrew, great job as always. I'm sure there are questions we did not answer, so please feel free to reach out to any of us and we can get them answered. And coming up next in literally seconds, we will be talking about, if I can find which sliver in my calendar this is, it's going to be a fireside chat with my friends at Percona, the database folks. So please stick around for that.
They're awesome.
Yeah, they're great. And without further ado, stay safe out there, everybody, and see you soon.